I'm Cindy Drew. Welcome to the Classic Rock Archive. We're talking today with James Cosby, the author of Rock Music Authority and Western Culture, 1964 to 1980. The book takes a look at many classic rock artists. One of the many acts Cosby delves into is Black Sabbath and their dynamic lead singer Ozzy Osbourne. Here's author James Cosby on his findings, and he'll read some of his Black Sabbath excerpt.
So part of what makes the book different is I'm really trying to understand the background of these guys, these genres and the music. Like, how did it come about? Like, it doesn't never comes out of nowhere. Like, what I keep finding is every artist I research, you look at their backstory, it always makes total sense, right? And Ozzy and Black Sabbath are such a perfect example of that. Most people watching this will probably already know that Black Sabbath was sort of the inventors of heavy metal, starting in the late '60s into the '70s and beyond. And Ozzy Osbourne was their iconic frontman. And like when I was growing up in the '80s, Ozzy was sort of, and heavy metal had this kind of weird reputation as possibly evil, like people literally thinking it might be satanic. It makes you think, well, what was it really about? What was heavy metal really about? And so if you go back and look at Ozzy's story, you start to understand, like, when you go back to like the city they all came from, like all four of the original members came from Birmingham, England, which was the second largest city in England, this heavy industrial center, steel producing factories, and really a harsh city. But that's the origins of where these guys come from. And so where Ozzy Osbourne, just to start with Ozzy, he grew up in this really rough neighborhood where there was like gang fights with, broken bottles and steel pipes. It was a daily thing. And his family was really messed up, a lot of mental health issues. When Ozzy's 15, it's 1963, he's hearing the Beatles for the first time. All of a sudden, the Beatles, before they even come to the US, they're blowing up in England. And Ozzy would later say, you can't understate what that meant to me. Like, it just changed his life, just like this miserable life. All of a sudden he's got some hope, and so that's where heavy metal comes from, right? Like, coming out of that background, like what other genre of music was going to come out of that? Like disco, probably not, So having said all that, I'll read this passage from the book. So Black Sabbath, also important at this point, was Birmingham, England's Black Sabbath, who formed in 1970. And I just was talking about Led Zeppelin and a heavier, harder form of rock and rolls coming about. Sabbath become known as the founding fathers of the genre of heavy metal, which Zeppelin was also an important factor in. Sabbath was less bluesy than Zeppelin and more focused on establishing the use of extreme pummeling rhythms that effectively, as one writer put it, quote, crushed the bouncy rhythms of popular rock. In part, heavy metal would be the voice of brewing frustration and deep-seated anger and even rage. Black Sabbath would also give a voice to that aspect of the rock culture looking to make a connection between life and the cosmos without the need for approval from the establishment or organized religion's perceived dogma. All of the band members, drummer Bill Ward, bassist Terrence Geezer Butler, and lead guitarist Tony Iommi, started with tough working class jobs in Birmingham. Osbourne worked at a slaughterhouse and then as a car horn tester. His trainer was near death. While Iommi lost the tips of 2 fingers in a sheet metal factory accident, which altered his playing style. Butler was also the band's primary lyricist and drew from Aleister Crowley, who I've already talked about in the book quite a bit. A side note, a solo Ozzy Osbourne later wrote the song Mr. Crowley, although he was clearly unimpressed by the Black Magician. So Ozzy was always associated with Mr. Crowley, but the song doesn't really endorse or it's not necessarily a fan. Butler's lyrical themes also include horror films, black magic themed novels, and sometimes positively from his Catholic faith. Butler and Osbourne had taken the band name from the title of the 1963 Boris Karloff horror film. The first song on the band's self-titled 1970 debut album, also Black Sabbath, set the tone not only for the band's career, but for most every heavy metal band to follow, as well as similar genres like goth. The song Black Sabbath sounds like the musical equivalent of the best, most menacing gothic horror movie ever. There are even church bell and thunderstorm sound effects. By song's end, it is a galloping rocker, the rhythm tracking the devil's hot pursuit. Despite Osbourne's plea to God for help earlier in the song, the people are on the run from Satan, terrified. In short, the rest of that debut album, along with 5 more standout albums released over the next 5 years, became the text of heavy metal. Black Sabbath created sludgy sonic heaviness, but they could also cut through it all with fast tempos and wailing guitar workouts on songs like Iron Man and Paranoid. Osbourne was a remarkably compelling vocalist, and he captured the power and mystery of the songs without becoming a caricature. As author Ian Christie described it, quote, Ozzy Osbourne delivered these lyrics as if in a trance, reading messages of truth written in the sky. From the beginning, the band's very name suggested at the least a certain lack of reverence for the church and conjured a pseudo-occultist image. Along with some drug-referencing lyrics, the band became obvious targets for both the mainstream press and the religious right. Yet Butler, for example, noted that everyone in the band believed in God. This even while the group continued to take up the counterculture's challenge to the notion that the church was the infallible, final word on everything under the sun. At Sabbath's core, they wrestled with good and evil in a world in which they saw the powers that be as untrustworthy and self-destructive. On another signature song, War Pigs, the band explicitly declares who they see as doing the actual work of Satan, the generals and politicians sending people off to war again and again. And on After Forever, Butler actually asserts his Catholic perspective with lyrics explicitly acknowledging that the only way to love is through God. In one particular song, Lord of This World, Osbourne sings from Satan's point of view, although the song pretty clearly puts Satan and his followers in a negative perspective. The song comments on humanity's apparent lack of faith and its moral confusion, and thus serves as a challenge and a warning to listeners. I'll read the last part here. And then in the late 70s, Osbourne began doing solo work while also having increasingly severe addiction problems, leading to his being kicked out of the band in 1979. Sabbath would continue, and Osbourne would have a highly successful solo career. Both contributed to the success of the heavy metal genre in the ensuing decades.
Well, it does just kind of get to the point of like, I call it like the essential, like what you need to know about this artist. This is where they grew up. This is what their background was, this is how they were influenced and why their music is the way it is. That's what made it different to me in reading it from other books. So where is the book available?
It's available, of course, Amazon. It's also at the publishers. If you prefer to go through the publisher, it's McFarland Books.
In hardcover or soft cover and digital, right?
Right. Yep.
So look for Rock Music, Authority and Western Culture, 1964 to 1980. Now it is available. And James Cosby, want to thank you so much for coming on and talking about your book.
Thank you, Cindy. Good. Always good to talk to you.